Have you ever had an experience that suggested someone else was in your house and just thought, I don't want to know, and left it? Sometimes fear of the unknown just seems like the preferable option of facing a real, concrete danger. Normally it's nothing, though. One time, the beeper function of my wireless house phone went off when I was the only one home. It could only be called from the living room. Another time, I swear someone took some change from my desk. They're all probably just slightly disconcerting tricks of memory. But what would you do when something truly suggestive happens? Would you run, or just ignore it like I did? Last Monday was a normal day. I got up, brushed my teeth, changed into my school clothes, all little parts of my morning ritual. It seemed like it would be another totally unnoteworthy day, until I saw the strings. There were 3 or 4 thick twine strings in my room. They crisscrossed between the walls around my bed, one attached to the door. No way would I have missed them before. I should have tripped over them. They were tied to pins in the walls, which had also not existed before 10 seconds ago. Nobody could have been in my room while I was in it, let alone set this up. It was early. My brain wasn't processing